Good morning, Box Draper. Great to see you. Welcome. I hope everything is working here. If you are there in the chat and there are any issues with the sound or video, feel free to let me know. Welcome to Philosophy for Everyday Life. I'm Jimmy. This is a series called Kant for Everyone that I've been doing for a little while now. This is the 7th episode, and I truly hope that I will finish the preface to the second edition of the Critique of Pure Reason today. Looks like everything's okay on the stream. So last time we took a bit of a detour to take a look at some texts from Plato and Aristotle, which was a lot of fun. Hey, welcome. I find it really remarkable. I'm not going to go into all of that in detail, but one, the extent to which Kant, I think, is deeply engaged with the entire Western philosophical tradition. He really is pulling together all of the threads in a remarkable way and then kind of twisting them, like untangling them and twisting them together in his own remarkable way. What really stood out to me from last time was the way that Plato has these levels of knowledge. And Plato thinks that you can have the most certainty and the highest caliber of knowledge about the most abstract things, the form of the good, the ultimate highest realities. And you can have belief about lower things, physical objects, representations, imitations, copies of the ultimate realities. And hello, thank you for the chat. I am doing well. How are you? Kant reverses this and says that regarding, Kant wouldn't use the term highest realities, but metaphysical matters. We can only have belief. Kant uses the word faith, Glaube, but that can be belief or faith. And the way this works is through practical reason, which we'll have to get into the distinction between theoretical and practical reason more down the road. But Kant says knowledge, which Plato reserves for the highest things, Kant says, no, this is only for objects that we can directly experience. So he takes what Plato is up to and he inverts it in a remarkable way. We also see Kant talking about using terms like a priori and a posteriori, which I think he's getting, if not directly from Aristotle, from the Aristotelian tradition of philosophy. So there's just a lot going on, so much that could be unpacked. Before I go further, I just want to mention I will be hosting an intensive. It's going to be called Cultivating an Intellectual Life, starting the week of May 4th. There is a link to an interest form, and I'll be sort of opening up the actual registration before too long. But one of the things we'll be doing is looking at this book, Philosophy as a Way of Life, Pierre Hadot. Probably this chapter he has on spiritual exercises, and asking the question, what does it mean for philosophy truly to be a practice, not just sort of mental gymnastics or dialogue or thinking through hard ideas? It can be all of those things. But I think the point of Hadot's book is to say, yes, all of those things, but the purpose of those things, the reason philosophy cultivates these practices is for the sake of living a good human life, of being an excellent person, cultivating a sort of freedom. So if you're interested in that, I think it's going to be awesome. I'm really excited about it. And yeah, I'm sort of sorting out all the details now. So I hope to have the syllabus posted soon. If you want to stay up to date on that, the best way is probably to connect with me on Substack. I'll post the syllabus there, and yeah, there should also be a link in the description if you want to connect with me there. I also have a website, jimmyherring.com, so you can find information about what I'm up to there also. Okay, so that's all for that. I'm going to just repeat what I've said on each of these live streams before we jump right into Kant, which is learning philosophy is a lot like learning a language. And so part of what that involves is immersion, not not learning from a textbook or memorizing, concepts and rules. Those have their place, but part of it is just getting into the flow of the language, and that's part of that is why I'm doing these live streams as I am, reading the text, trying to scope out the sort of terminological landscape, inviting meanings to connect with each other across texts, from Kant to Plato and Aristotle, some of Kant's commentators, which we looked at a while ago now. So that's the approach I'm taking here. Yeah. And a couple of comments. Many philosophers get lost in impractical, theoretical, endless discussions, and another, no relation to real life. Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah. And it's a shame because philosophy has the potential to be transformative, personally transformative, which has been my experience of it, and which is why I'm excited to share it and to explore it with others. So one other thing I wanted to talk about, I received some excellent comments on my last live stream, and I just wanted to mention, see if this is not quite live. Let's see here. Live stream. Oh, I see. Go live. This may work now. Okay, I think it's up now. There's just a bit of a lag. So one suggestion is to read ahead a little bit more. I will do this as much as I can. There are time constraints to how much I can do in terms of pre-processing, but I agree that this would be nice. Finish the thought explanation before reading the comments. Noted. I will try to do that. And then the handwriting. I will work on my handwriting. And this comment about substance, this one above, I'm not sure how well this is working. The middle voice says, valid point about later philosophers using the same term in different ways. But you used the example of phenomenologists using to the things themselves and said these were the same words that Kant used when he said, we can't know things in themselves. But the phrase translated to the things themselves in Husserl is zur den Sachen selbst, whereas Kant's language is die Dinge an sich selbst. So not the same terms, and they have different meanings. A Sache has a more pragmatic meaning, that is the matter at hand. I think this is a really excellent comment, and it'd be awesome to do a full session on this term, the things themselves, things in themselves. Aristotle uses this term as well, so it would be really fascinating to trace it from Aristotle through to Kant and then through to Husserl. So, and that would take some pre-preparation. So I'll see what I can do on that. Okay. Something is not right with my setup here. I'm sorry about this. There. Okay, I think we're ready to jump into Kant. So where we got to last time in terms of reading was this bit right here, where Kant says that he found it necessary to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. And this goes right to what I was just talking about with Plato, denying that we have knowledge of ultimate metaphysical transcendent realities in order to make room for a different kind of relationship to those realities through faith, which Kant, as I said, understands in terms of practical reason. I want to continue out his discussion here in the preface, and hopefully we'll wrap it up. There's a really interesting long footnote on what he calls psychological idealism, which is probably the most substantive part of the remaining pages. We'll see if we have time to get to it. So Kant writes, though it may not then be very difficult to leave to posterity the bequest of a systematic metaphysic. So note that he's saying he really thinks that he has systematized all of metaphysical knowledge, even though he's denying that we have, strictly speaking, knowledge of it. There we go. Constructed in conformity with a critique of pure reason. Yet such a gift is not to be valued lightly, for not only will reason be enabled to follow the secure path of a science, and if you remember, he's very concerned with setting metaphysics on the same type of secure path that he thinks other sciences have traveled, such as physics, mathematics. Logic is kind of a unique borderline case because it doesn't have any content, but he thinks other sciences, which he interprets in a broader sense than just the natural sciences, disciplines, fields of knowledge, have a kind of security. They have a kind of a fund of permanent knowledge. And he wants to do that for metaphysics. And he thinks he has. So reason will be enabled to follow the secure path of a science instead of, as hitherto, groping at random without circumspection or self-criticism. Our inquiring youth will also be in a position to spend their time more profitably than in the ordinary dogmatism by which they are so early and so greatly encouraged to indulge in easy speculation about things of which they understand nothing, and into which neither they nor anyone else will ever have any insight. Encouraged indeed to invent new ideas and opinions while neglecting the study of the better established sciences. Dogmatism is an important term for Kant. I'll say this just by way of kind of reminder and review. But if you remember, Kant is thinking of himself as synthesizing these two traditions of empiricism. If I write more slowly, it will be neater. Patience. Empiricism and rationalism. Kant's right here. Empiricism carries on in analytic philosophy, and rationalism carries on in continental philosophy. Kant thinks that one of the biggest liabilities of empiricism is skepticism. And we haven't talked about this in detail yet, but he thinks that skepticism is self-defeating. It undermines itself or destroys itself. And the biggest liability of rationalism is dogmatism, which is basically uncritically teaching or believing metaphysical positions that haven't been through the kind of acid of Kant's critical analysis of what reason can actually do. He thinks reason needs to do a sort of form of self-criticism so that it understands its own limitations before we try to really engage in accepting, propounding, believing, teaching metaphysical truths. and um, trying to enter that territory without having undertaken a critique of pure reason, which is the purpose of this book, he thinks leads to dogmatism. But above all, he continues, there is the inestimable benefit, the benefit of this, setting metaphysics on a secure path, that all objections to morality and religion will be forever silenced, and this in Socratic fashion, namely by the clearest proof of the ignorance of the objectors. Now, this is remarkable. One of Kant's contemporaries, Moses Mendelssohn, my dissertation was on Kant and Mendelssohn. They read each other's work. They respected each other. They disagreed profoundly about certain matters. And Mendelssohn called Kant all-destroying, all-crushing. And there really has been this perception, I think, ever since this book was published, that Kant completely destroyed metaphysics, undermined the possibility of believing in religion, and maybe didn't undermine morality, but definitely divorced it from any sort of need for a kind of religious connection of any kind. It's just, when you read a sentence like this, you have to take Kant at face value and say he really believes that he is removing all objections to morality and religion. And this claim is just as bold as the claim that he has permanently and fundamentally solved all the problems in metaphysics. I mean, the claims, the sort of grandiosity of the claims is remarkable. You either have to think that Kant really believes this, or you have to think that he is not being sincere, and that this is basically like some packaging that he put around his work to make it more palatable. I happen to think he's sincere. I think if you read through Kant's work, you find, for one, you find a person who would have found it impossible to write in a sort of duplicitous, insincere manner. That's just so inconsistent with everything that Kant says about what he thinks and believes. But also, is just, it's like cutting out a big slice of Kant's thought to say that actually all the stuff he has to say about sort of removing the objections to morality and religion is just kind of packaging designed to, like, to persuade who? I don't know. I just, it's not compelling to me. So that's not how I read him. I think he is being sincere when he says this. We have a question. Is there a connection to Karl Popper? I suspect he also dealt with this topic. If you could expand on specifically which topic you have in mind, or what aspect of Karl Popper's thought. I have a feeling you're referring back to the diagram, but I missed exactly when this question came in. So Kant continues, there has always existed in the world, and there will always continue to exist, some kind of metaphysics, and with it the dialectic that is natural to pure reason. It is therefore the first and most important task of philosophy to deprive metaphysics once and for all of its injurious influence by attacking its errors at their very source. Notwithstanding this important change in the field of the sciences and the loss of its fancied possessions, which speculative reason must suffer, general human interests remain in the same privileged position as hitherto, and the advantages which the world has hitherto derived from the teaching of pure reason are in no way diminished. The loss affects only the monopoly of the schools, in no respect the interests of humanity. So he thinks his critique of metaphysics and of the capacity of reason, it is going to disturb the sort of scholastic grip on how people think, but free humanity as a whole to think for itself. And if you've seen his essay, What is Enlightenment? He says enlightenment is releasing oneself from self-incurred immaturity and daring to think for oneself. Something like this is what I think he has in mind here. To the question about Karl Popper, I believe Karl Popper would sort of fall into the analytic side um, of this diagram. He would that's my understanding of where he would be in that tradition, but I think we'd have to get into more specifics to think about exactly what where he would fall there. I think of Karl Popper as maybe more of a political philosopher. Um, yeah. Anyway. Okay, Kant continues, I appeal to the most rigid dogmatist, whether the proof of the continued existence of our soul after death, derived from the simplicity of substance. Okay, I'm just going to notice these themes that he's bringing up. Okay, so the existence of the soul after death, or of the freedom of the will as opposed to a universal mechanism, arrived at through the subtle but ineffectual distinctions between subjective and objective practical necessity, or of the existence of God, as deduced from the concept of an ens realissimum, a most real being, of the contingency of the changeable, and of the necessity of a prime mover. So these, in Kant's mind, these three, we may as well write these down. The existence and immortality of the soul, free will, and the existence of God. These are the kind of key metaphysical ideas. And these are what he thinks we cannot have knowledge of, but we can access through faith. So he's appealing to the dogmatist, which is sort of this scholastic person who claims to kind of have a official sort of position on these matters. Whether the proofs of these things have ever, upon passing out from the schools, succeeded in reaching the public mind or in exercising the slightest influence on its convictions. So Kant is saying, okay, someone's going to worry that by denying knowledge here, by saying that we can't have metaphysical knowledge, that it's going to undermine people's belief in these important metaphysical truths. It's going to destroy religion and morality. And Kant is saying the arguments that you're so attached to have never had much impact on public opinion. So that argument doesn't work. He continues, that has never been found to occur, these scholastic arguments being publicly important. And in view of the unfitness of the common human understanding for such subtle speculation, ought never to have been expected. It's kind of like, saying if when Einstein came along and challenged Newton that, everyone was going to stop believing in gravity or something. It's like ordinary human understanding doesn't depend on complex, sophisticated, theoretical knowledge, which is what Kant, understands himself to be engaging in. Such widely held convictions, so far as they rest on rational grounds, are due to quite other considerations. The hope of a future life, so this is the immortality of the soul, has its source in that notable characteristic of our nature, never to be capable of being satisfied by what is temporal, as insufficient for the capacities of its whole destination. The consciousness of freedom rests exclusively on the clear exhibition of duties, in opposition to all claims of the inclinations. The belief in a wise and great author of the world is generated solely by the glorious order, beauty, and providential care everywhere displayed in nature. So Kant thinks that we have, even if we cannot have knowledge of immortality, freedom, and the existence of God, he has a concept of subjective necessity, which means basically human beings can't help taking for granted ideas something like these. One analogy he uses for this is optics, where, for example, when we look into the distance, objects appear small. And of course, it's not true that they're smaller. So it's an illusion in a sense. Um, but it's not an illusion um, in this sense that um, something is wrong with our sight. That is part of the correct functioning of vision, that objects that are far away look smaller. So there's a sort of illusion or semblance built into the structure of proper functioning vision. And Kant thinks that our relationship to these metaphysical truths is kind of like this. Um, they can't be avoided. They're not objectively necessary in a way, but subjectively they're necessary and valid. They have a valid place in the structure of how we think about ourselves in the world. We'll have to unpack all of that later, but this is kind of what he's getting at. When the schools have been brought to recognize that they can lay no claim to higher and fuller insight in a matter of universal human concern than that which is equally within the reach of the great mass of men, ever to be held by us in the highest esteem. So he's not talking down to, quote unquote, the masses. He's saying, no, everyone has access to these truths. And that as schools of philosophy, they should limit themselves to the study of those universally comprehensible and for moral purposes sufficient grounds of proof. Then not only do these latter possessions remain undisturbed, but through this very fact, they acquire yet greater authority. I'm just going to read a little further and then I'll address this question. The change affects only the arrogant pretensions of the schools, which would fain be counted the sole authors and possessors of such truths, as indeed they can justly claim to be in many other branches of knowledge. So he's saying scholastic knowledge is fine, but these basic human truths are the possession of everyone, reserving the key to themselves and communicating to the public their use only. I did look up the Latin here. What he knows no better than I, he wants to appear to know alone. At the same time, due regard is paid to the more moderate claims of the speculative philosopher. He still remains the sole authority in regard to a science which benefits the public without their knowing it, namely the critique of reason. So this critique that Kant is up to, this is really where we need to apply scholastic knowledge. But to these general metaphysical truths that sort of ground human life and behavior, he's saying that's the possession of everyone. Now we have a question. What does Kant mean by duties in opposition to inclination? Just find that exact line. Yeah. This is a core part of Kant's moral philosophy. Kant thinks that an action is morally worthy if the motivation for the action on the sort of deepest level is from duty rather than inclination, in the sense of something that I want to do. It's often thought that Kant believes that, therefore, if you have inclinations, those inclinations are necessarily bad, and that if you do any action that is consistent with your inclinations, it's immoral. And Friedrich Schiller sort of came up with this little poem mocking Kant and saying that well, if that's true, the best way to be a good friend to your friends is to dislike them, but to choose to be their friend out of duty. And that's not what Kant meant, but it's a common sort of misunderstanding of what he was up to. So very high level, that's what he means by that. So he goes on, this critique of reason can never become popular, and indeed, there's no need that it should. For just as fine-spun arguments in favor of useful truths make no appeal to the general mind, so neither do the subtle objections that can be raised against them. On the other hand, both inevitably present themselves to everyone who rises to the height of speculation. And it is therefore the duty of the schools, by means of a thorough investigation of the rights of speculative reason, what is it actually legitimate for speculative reason to do? Once for all, to prevent the scandal, which sooner or later is sure to break out even among the masses, as the result of the disputes in which metaphysicians, and as such finally also the clergy, inevitably become involved to the consequent perversion of their teaching. So if the schools, the scholastics are fighting with each other about these metaphysical matters, it will sort of negatively impact the general population. Criticism alone can sever the root of materialism, fatalism, atheism, free thinking, fanaticism, and superstition, which can be injurious universally, as well as of idealism and skepticism, which are dangerous chiefly to the schools and hardly allow of being handed on to the public. So Kant thinks we can cut off the intellectual root of these problems. Materialism, there's no higher reality. Fatalism, there's no free will. Atheism, of course, no God. Free thinking, fanaticism, and superstition. I don't know exactly what he means by free thinking. Fanaticism and superstition, Kant was not a fan of sort of religious, he uses the term enthusiasm, sort of like extreme religious experiences, superstitions, stuff like this. Okay, I'm going to continue. Okay. I'm going to finish this paragraph and then I'll turn to these questions. If governments think proper to interfere with the affairs of the learned, it would be more consistent with a wise regard for science, as well as for mankind, to favor the freedom of such criticism, by which alone the labors of reason can be established on a firm basis, than to support the ridiculous despotism of the schools, which raise a loud cry of public danger over the destruction of cobwebs, to which the public has never paid any attention, and the loss of which it can therefore never feel. So there was a real concern at this time, differently than we have now in most modern societies, about regulating intellectual inquiry in a way that benefited the public, and specifically sort of with respect to morality and religion. It sort of thought like if philosophers go around undermining the credibility of morality and religion, which Kant mentioned earlier, they're going to be dangerous to society. And this was, Kant experienced some challenges in this area. So if you were going to say that he's being insincere in his claims to be supporting religion and morality, you would appeal to this. You would say, well, Kant had to convince the authorities, the Prussian emperor. I'm going to get my timeline mixed up, but Frederick the Great is one of the ones who was in there at some point, and then his son. That Kant needs to convince these authorities that he's not a public menace, that he's not undermining religion and morality through what he's saying. And so that's kind of what these couple of paragraphs have been about. Is Kant saying, no, I denied knowledge to make room for faith. This is the whole point. I'm opening up the possibility of a better established public commitment to religion and morality. Okay, so to these questions. One, I still didn't understand how it related to consciousness of freedom in that sentence. So yeah, how does following duty rather than inclination relate to consciousness of freedom? Again, this would take more time to unpack, and it would be great to go to some of his moral philosophy for this at some point. But Kant thinks that inclinations, things that we desire, that we want, are not bad, but our true freedom consists in our capacity to legislate the moral law to ourselves, and to act from duty alone, to follow a sort of pure will that is uncontaminated by any external factors. So that's consciousness of freedom, and he thinks that we are all conscious of this innate capacity for truly free action, which for Kant doesn't mean doing whatever you want. For Kant, freedom is a sort of self-consistency, and it's the capacity to follow rational moral principles. So that's what he means by that. If you're unsatisfied, this is another case where learning the vocabulary, learning sort of how this language works, just takes some time. A couple of other questions. How is Kant's epistemological approach consistent with the philosophical approach of analytical and propositional logic? And Joseph Lim. Hey, Joe. Yeah, it's great to see you, Joe. Thanks for being here. Um, so how is this approach? I think I would need to know more about what you have in mind. If you could unpack when you ask about Kant's epistemological approach, what you mean by that, um, and what what in analytical and propositional logic you want to know about consistency. I'll admit I'm not trained in like modern analytic philosophy. I mean, I have some experience with it, but that's not like my sort of main area of training. So there may be things you're wondering about there that I'm not immediately picking up on. So I'd welcome that. And then Box Draper, yes, you say that makes sense about freedom, consciousness of freedom. It's kind of like willpower to overcome your baser inclinations. Yes, you're moving in the right direction. I think it's even more than that for Kant, but that is the basic idea. Thank you for these questions. This is wonderful. I really appreciate the questions. Okay, so Kant continues. This critique is not opposed to the dogmatic procedure of reason in its pure knowledge as science, for that must always be dogmatic, that is, yield strict proof from sure principles a priori. This is nice. It's nice that this is a nice definition of what is dogmatism, or I'm sorry, a dogmatic procedure. He distinguishes dogmatic procedure from dogmatism. He's saying, I'm not opposed to this, which is yielding proof from certain a priori principles. I am opposed to dogmatism, which is to the presumption that it is possible to make progress with pure knowledge according to principles from concepts alone, those that are philosophical, as reason has long been in the habit of doing, and that it is possible to do this without having first investigated in what way and by what right reason has come into possession of these concepts. So he says it's fine to start from first principles and make deductions. That's dogmatic procedure. But you have to really investigate the source of these first principles and what right reason has to lay claim to knowledge of those principles. And he thinks that hasn't been done until this work. Dogmatism is thus the dogmatic procedure of pure reason, without previous criticism of its own powers. In withstanding dogmatism, we must not allow ourselves to give free rein to that loquacious shallowness, which assumes for itself the name of popularity, nor yet to skepticism, which makes short work with all metaphysics. On the contrary, such criticism is the necessary preparation for a thoroughly grounded metaphysics, which as science must necessarily be developed dogmatically according to the strictest demands of system, in such manner as to satisfy not the general public, but the requirements of the schools. So he is going to sort of satisfy the scholastic or scientific requirements of professional philosophers on this level of critique, of undermining the dogmatism, of criticizing the first principles of reason. He continues, for that is a demand to which it stands pledged, and which it may not neglect, namely, that it carry out its work entirely a priori to the complete satisfaction of speculative reason. In the execution of the plan prescribed by the critique, that is, in the future system of metaphysics, we have therefore to follow the strict method of the celebrated Wolff. The greatest of all the dogmatic philosophers, Christian Wolff, was one of Kant's important predecessors. He was the first to show by example, and by his example he awakened that spirit of thoroughness which is not extinct in Germany. How the secure progress of a science is to be attained only through orderly establishment of principles, clear determination of concepts, insistence upon strictness of proof, and avoidance of venturesome, non-consecutive steps in our inferences. So Wolff established, what does dogmatic procedure look like? He was thus peculiarly well fitted to raise metaphysics to the dignity of a science, if only it had occurred to him to prepare the ground beforehand by a critique of the organ, that is, of pure reason itself. The blame for his having failed to do so lies not so much with himself as with the dogmatic way of thinking prevalent in his day, and with which the philosophers of his time, and of all previous times, have no right to reproach one another. So he is giving credit to all previous philosophers, and just saying this sort of way of thinking wasn't available to them. Those who reject both the method of Wolff and the procedure of a critique of pure reason can have no other aim than to shake off the fetters of science altogether, and thus to change work into play, certainty into opinion, philosophy into philodoxy, love of wisdom into love of belief. So he doesn't want that. Okay. All of this, Kant has been basically defending himself against objections. He's been saying, listen, if you think that my critique of pure reason, which includes undermining long-standing arguments that really do go all the way back to Plato and Aristotle and have been taken for granted by the mainstream of Western philosophy up through Descartes and Leibniz and Wolff, he's saying, I do realize I'm undermining these, but one, it's not going to have a negative impact on the public because they don't care about these subtle arguments anyway. And two, I'm actually strengthening religion and morality. It would be interesting to see as we go whether the sincerity of Kant's claim there is compelling. I've already said that I'm convinced, but I'd be curious to see how others read it. So now he's going to tell us about his second edition, what he changed. He has a very long, interesting footnote. We're already at 43 minutes, so we'll see how far we get there. But we'll get into some of his comments on what he's doing differently in this second edition. And a clarification on this question. Kant's epistemology, as in that causality of objects exists a priori, thus externally represented as interpretation. If so, then analytically this a priori stance is the axiomatic system or transcendental. Okay. I don't think I can fully answer this question off the top of my head. You should be able to find my email on my YouTube homepage. And if you want to follow up, I would be interested if you could point me toward more info on this question, because I'm interested to think about how Kant's work relates to later developments in philosophy as well. So I'd love to follow up on this. So Kant continues, as regards the second edition, I have, as is fitting, endeavored to profit by the opportunity in order to remove wherever possible difficulties and obscurity, which not perhaps without my fault, is admitting that he's an obscure writer, may have given rise to the many misunderstandings into which even acute thinkers have fallen in passing judgment upon my book. And it's true, the early readers of the critique really didn't know what to make of it. And that includes Moses Mendelssohn, who I mentioned earlier. In the propositions themselves and their proofs, and also in the form and completeness of the architectonic plan, I have found nothing to alter. This is due partly to the long examination to which I have subjected them before offering them to the public, partly to the nature of the subject matter with which we are dealing. This is interesting. If you go back to, I think it was the second episode in the series, we talked about the patchwork theory, which Norman Kemp Smith, who did this translation, was an advocate of. Kemp Smith thinks that Kant just contradicted himself all over the place, and that it was that this was because he had basically stitched together in a kind of mechanical fashion manuscripts from a decade of work. Another commentator, H.J. Patton, said, "This is nonsense. First of all, you can't untangle the layers of Kant's thinking like this, trying to find which idea came from which period in Kant's thought. But also, once you understand the whole, it all comes together in a different way." I think Kant is giving us something like this here. He's saying that the structure of the work, he spent a long time basically solidifying. I just think this statement here militates against the patchwork theory, which is scholars don't really take very seriously anymore. So it's kind of a moot point. But I think it's helpful to just have it in mind as a it was an important moment in interpreting Kant's work about 100 years ago. This is due partly to the long examination to which I have subjected them before offering them to the public, partly to the nature of the subject matter with which we are dealing. For pure speculative reason has a structure, wherein everything is an organ, the whole being for the sake of every part, and every part for the sake of all the others. So that even the smallest imperfection, be it a fault, error, or a deficiency, must inevitably betray itself in use. So he's saying the structure of he thinks he has taken a comprehensive inventory of everything that reason is and can do, and everything that reason can know by itself, just through its own resources. And there's such a tightly integrated structure to what reason is capable of that if you mess up one part, everything else will be impacted and the whole will be messed up as well. This system will, as I hope, maintain throughout the future this unchangeableness. It is not self-conceit which justifies me in this confidence, but the evidence experimentally obtained through the parity of the result, whether we proceed from the smallest elements to the whole of pure reason, or reverse-wise, from the whole, for this also is presented to reason through its final end in the sphere of the practical to each part. Any attempt to change even the smallest part at once gives rise to contradictions, not merely in the system, but in human reason in general. I'll just flag the use of contradiction is the key component of how Kant does philosophy. He thinks that if a position gives rise to contradiction, you are more or less justified in inferring the opposite of that position, with a big sort of asterisk there, which we'll get into another time. So you find that if one position gives rise to contradictions and you can develop a different position which resolves the contradictions, you have a sort of basic warrant for taking the alternative position. Also, just want to note that he really thinks of himself as not a natural scientist, but as using the method of the natural sciences in using experimentation to obtain his results. And that he thinks he is giving us a permanent fund of metaphysical knowledge, or of the sort of structure of reason itself. Something like Newton's laws of thermodynamics, or the laws of logic that we get from Aristotle. It's interesting. Almost no one has agreed that Kant succeeded in giving us the last word on the structure of reason. It's also noteworthy that Newton was surpassed by Einstein, and that physics is no longer in a kind of stable. There's no longer a sense that physics is sort of a solved problem, the first principles of physics, and logic also. There's a lot more uncertainty in logic that we get in the 20th century. So what does this mean for Kant's project and what he thinks he's up to? I think it's going to be hard for any modern person to go all the way with Kant. A couple of more comments. So, being a formalist and grounded in the modern forms of mathematical logic and formal forms of philosophy, thus for Kant is the birth in the analytical thinking as implicit as his philosophy presupposes it. Causality in Kant is transcendental a priori, not an analytic axiom system. It's a condition for experience, not a description of reality itself. Correct. Yes. It's a condition for experience, and he also thinks it's necessary, which is interesting. Yeah, we'll get into all of this as we go further, but thank you for these comments. Okay, Kant continues. As to the mode of exposition, on the other hand, much still remains to be done. And in this edition, I have sought to make improvements which should help in removing, first, the misunderstanding in regard to the aesthetic, especially concerning the concept of time. And secondly, the obscurity of the deduction of the concepts of understanding. Thirdly, a supposed want of sufficient evidence in the proofs of the principles of pure understanding. And finally, the false interpretations placed upon the paralogisms charged against rational psychology. Okay, so a lot of anticipation there. Beyond this point, that is beyond the end of the first chapter of the Transcendental Dialectic, I have made no changes in the mode of exposition. So you'll find, like right here, we have this B. B means second edition in the German manuscripts, and you'll also see A. So A and B, first edition, second edition. And sometimes we'll have parallel texts of both editions. I think we're going to have to skip this long footnote. It's extremely interesting on what he calls psychological idealism, but we're almost at an hour, and I want to get through the rest of this preface. Time was too short to allow of further changes, and besides, I have not found among competent and impartial critics any misapprehension in regard to the remaining sections. Though I shall not venture to name these critics with the praise that is their due, the attention which I have paid to their comments will easily be recognized in the new passages above mentioned. These improvements involve, however, a small loss, not to be prevented save by making the book too voluminous, namely, that I have had to omit or abridge certain passages which, though not indeed essential to the completeness of the whole, may yet be missed by many readers as otherwise helpful. Only so could I obtain space for what, as I hope, is now a more intelligible exposition, which, though altering absolutely nothing in the fundamentals of the propositions put forward, or even in their proofs, yet here and there departs so far from the previous method of treatment that mere interpolations could not be made to suffice. So, and in modern English editions at least, we just keep all of it. This loss, which is small and can be remedied by consulting the first edition, will, I hope, be compensated by the greater clearness of the new text. I have observed with pleasure and thankfulness in various published works, alike in critical reviews and in independent treatises, that the spirit of thoroughness is not extinct in Germany. He said that before about Wolff, but has only been temporarily overshadowed by the prevalence of a pretentiously free manner of thinking. Pretension is a technical term for Kant, pretension, presumption, and it means basically laying claim to know something that you really have no sort of right to know. So you could think of, what he's doing with the critique of pure reason is sort of cutting off the pretentious or presumptuous use of reason. And that the thorny paths of the critique have not discouraged courageous and clear heads from setting themselves to master my book, a work which leads to a methodical and as such alone enduring and therefore most necessary science of pure reason. We have another comment. You're German, you know these German words. If you should have questions about German words language, I can help you. That would be wonderful. Condition for experience, a subjectivity, however, paradoxically with the inherent structures of objective natures of causality. Yeah. There's this paradox between the structures of subjective consciousness being objectively necessary, which is another one of the just sort of wild reversals that Kant undertakes. I'm not sure exactly how to say this name here. My German friend, Musha blah blah. But if you have resources on this comment I mentioned from the beginning about things themselves versus things in themselves, Sache versus Ding, I think that's right. That'd be great. If you want to send me an email or follow up in some way, it'd be very interesting to think about this more. Okay, so to his readers, Kant says, his courageous critics, to these worthy men who so happily combine thoroughness of insight with a talent for lucid exposition, which I cannot regard myself as possessing, I leave the task of perfecting what here and there in its exposition is still somewhat defective. For in this regard, the danger is not that of being refuted, but of not being understood. There's a line I love. I think it's maybe in a letter when Kant is talking about how he wishes that Moses Mendelssohn would read the Critique of Pure Reason and take it more seriously, he sort of laments his own unclear writing, and he says, "I am no Mendelssohn." Mendelssohn was known for just having like beautiful German prose, being one of the best, certainly the best philosophical writer of his generation. And Kant is now the more famous thinker, but as a writer, he is sort of infamous. From now on, though I cannot allow myself to enter into controversy, I shall take careful note of all suggestions, be they from friends or from opponents, for use in accordance with this propedeutic, in the further elaboration of the system. In the course of these labors, I have advanced somewhat far in years. This month I reach my 64th year. And I must be careful with my time if I am to succeed in my proposed scheme of providing a metaphysic of nature and of morals, which will confirm the truth of my critique in the two fields of speculative and practical reason. So the Critique of Pure Reason is really just a sort of preface to the really essential work of fleshing out the metaphysics that he wants to build. The clearing up of the obscurities in the present work, they are hardly to be avoided in a new enterprise, and the defense of it as a whole, I must therefore leave to those worthy men who have made my teaching their own. A philosophical work cannot be armed at all points like a mathematical treatise, and may therefore be open to objection in this or that respect, while yet the structure of the system, taken in its unity, is not in the least endangered. Few have the versatility of mind to familiarize themselves with a new system, and owing to the general distaste for all innovation, still fewer have the inclination to do so. If we take single passages torn from their contexts and compare them with one another, apparent contradictions are not likely to be lacking. There you go, patchwork theory, especially in a work that is written with any freedom of expression. And yeah, it's worth noting, Kant does not always use the same terms with the same meaning, which can make it difficult. In the eyes of those who rely on the judgment of others, such contradictions have the effect of placing the work in an unfavorable light, but they are easily resolved by those who have mastered the idea of the whole. So if you want to understand the specific passages, you really have to get the idea. You have to get it you have to have this light bulb moment, and then you can interpret the individual passages correctly. If a theory has in itself stability, the stresses and strains which may at first have seemed very threatening to it serve only in the course of time to smooth away its inequalities. And if men of impartiality, insight, and true popularity devote themselves to its exposition, it may also, in a short time, secure for itself the necessary elegance of statement. So he's saying, I've done the hard conceptual work. I'm going to leave it up to my sympathetic readers, other philosophers, to do the work of smoothing out the presentation and expression of the system. A question: can consciousness to you ever be made into a computational phenomenological system? That's a fascinating question. I'm curious what you mean by computational. I mean, that makes that, of course, in this moment makes me think of AI and questions about the extent to which artificial intelligence, and I feel the need to put quotation marks around intelligence when we speak of artificial intelligence, whether computations can sort of rise to the level of consciousness the way that we look at it in phenomenology. My short answer to that is I don't know. And we did not talk about whether external objects exist. That was, this is another question. To this question, I would ask, we could probably get through the footnote in about 15 minutes. So Box Draper, do you want to read the footnote that talks about external objects, or should I save it for next time? Or anyone else who wants to weigh in? I will do it if there is remaining energy for more heavy philosophy. I'm going to take a drink. Since you asked, I will do it. It's this footnote here. Oh, you can save it? Okay, I'll save it for next time. Good. Thanks for the answer. Um, okay, I'm gonna wrap up here. That was a full hour. Um, the questions have been awesome. Thank you. It's wonderful to have you here. Wonderful to carry on this dialogue and read this interesting text together. It's very rich. There are, I think, many questions that I can only answer partially. And yeah, so thanks for your insights. Again, feel free to connect with me on Substack if you're interested in going deeper next month, cultivating an intellectual life. I would love to see you there for that. Okay, I think I will wrap up here. Thanks again.